Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Total Soccer Show. My name is Joe Lowry, and today we are diving back into the MLS postseason. Every game 2 from every round 1 series, a lot of numbers there, is in the books in the MLS playoffs. To join me to talk through all of the latest on-field action and probably a bunch of other stuff too, knowing us, is the one, the only, it's Jeff Reuter. Jeff, how are you?
I'm good. I also want to pour one out for the 2 game 1s that we probably won't acknowledge whatsoever that happened since we last recorded. But such is the schedule, isn't it?
Yeah, tree falling in the forest, no one around, LAFC beating Austin barely, Charlotte losing to NYC. I mean, really, those things didn't happen. Effectively, They didn't happen. We will talk about those series and every other series on this show. If you want to hear us talk about other things pretty smooth, try out Total Soccer Show, patreon.com/Total Soccer Show. Nailed it. First try for bonus stuff. You can also hop on our Discord where we're talking about MLS. We're talking about USL teams temporarily ceasing operations and tons of other stuff in the Discord. Literally right now, someone is probably typing in the Discord as I'm talking. I'm going to bet that that's true. That feels real. That feels like a fact. And so it is. So if you want to join the Discord, hang out with us.
Right now, someone is typing. Yeah.
Good. Is it because you're typing? Jeff's in the Discord. Yeah. Jeff's probably typing to make me not tell lies on the Total Soccer Show. You can come and hang out with us in the Discord. Tons of bonus stuff over on Patreon as well. Patreon.com/Total Soccer Show. Jeff, let's get right into it. We're going to start with the series that are still up for grabs. So we've got 5 series that are sprinting towards a game 3. We've got 3 series that are done where there were sweeps. We're going to start with the ones that are still open. We're also going to work in reverse chronological order because I'm sick like that, and I like to talk about games that are most relevant first. So let us begin with the Seattle Sounders 4, Minnesota United 2. This game was last night as we're recording on Tuesday, November 4th. Jeff, after game 1, which was that really tight KG 0-0 that Minnesota won in the penalty shootout, we talked about Brian Schmetzer needing to make a change to his 11 because the Sounders just didn't create a lot of chances until very late in that game. He did that. Danny Musovski started up top as the number 9 in this match. Jordan Morris then moved to the right wing. Ferreira moved to the left, and Rothrock moved to the bench. That was the reordered Seattle 11. What did you make of that switch? Is it sort of what you were thinking Brian Schmetzer might do? And what did you make of Seattle's performance?
Yeah, it was what they needed to do. I was on Lobbing Scorchers late night with Ari Lillenwell on Thursday, I want to say. And one thing that we were talking about is just how the attacking movement patterns do construct good chances for number 9s who are doing typical number 9 things, making number 9 moves. But Jordan Morris isn't necessarily getting into all those spots. And this is not me relitigating is Jordan Morris a 9? Is Jordan Morris a winger conversation from a decade ago? I actually think Jordan Morris's best position would be as a second striker in like an old 2-man structure that Seattle has just simply pretty much never used in his career. But that's where it makes most sense because he wants to play a little bit off. He wants to get on the ball sooner. He wants to dribble more. Musovski has a lot of what's in Morris' skill set, but the parts that he lacks actually add specificity to how to use him. And I think that when you look at how Seattle plays when he's on the field, he's line leading, he's getting involved in the build-up in the middle third more often, so the possession sequences maybe flow a little bit more naturally. There's a place, we talk about this with other teams, right, where you need chances to funnel somewhere, right? And it's really clear where they should funnel to with Danny Musovski. He likes to get towards like the top of the 6 or the penalty spot pretty much, and he's been very good at getting into that spot since before he got to Seattle. So, they played to his strengths here. It's a case where I think I saw that this season in MLS play, I pulled these numbers. In games where Danny Musovski starts, Seattle has a goal difference of positive 21. In games where Danny Musovski does not start, they have a negative 9. And it's never that easy with one player off, one player on.
Sure.
But it kind of is sometimes when it's just something as simple as do you play with a true striker or not. And right now what you saw with Seattle was no, he didn't score the first goal. No, he didn't score the second goal. But you saw a lot of movement off the ball and a lot of players who were enjoying maybe some more freedom of responsibility. Morris was not getting picked up as clearly because Michael Boxall was busy focusing on Danny Musovski for the first 2, and then when he switched off, Musovski found a space, and then there's the third goal, right? You're able to find Obed Vargas, peppering some shots from deep. It was just a much more coherent Seattle Sounders performance, and kind of I think that the one that a lot of us who expected them, for me to win MLS Cup, but for others to just advance from this series, we expected to see much more of this. Joe, do you feel like this is a performance that they can actually build off of, or is it such a weird matchup that is just like, great, you had your fun party, now we're back into the pain caves for game 3?
I think it is a build-offable performance if you're Seattle, especially thinking about Game 3, where we know who Minnesota United are. And that's not to say that there couldn't be a little bit of a change-up from Eric Ramsey. We saw that from the first half to the second half, where the flow of this game was bizarre, right? Seattle go up, and they're up 3-0. Then they concede 2 goals in first-half stoppage time that sort of happened but felt like they didn't because the crowd was kind of still celebrating in moments but also just didn't acknowledge them. And all of a sudden it's 3-2 going into halftime. Eric Ramsey shifts at halftime from a really deep-seated 5-4-1 block to a much more aggressive 3-4-3 sort of pressing structure, at least to open the second half. We could see Minnesota United do that again, except from the jump in Game 3. But even still, Seattle are going to be the protagonists in Game 3. And I think with their performance in this game, with the personnel change that Brian Spencer brought together, and I love how you went through that, Jeff, and also with some tactical tweaks that I think we saw from this team in possession, I think they're very capable of putting in a similar performance. It will likely not be as good because they think the game does open slightly when Obed Vargas gets that opening goal off of the corner kick that Seattle have. But really, one thing that stood out to me that I think is very much repeatable for Seattle in this game is how effective, especially Christian Roldan, was as the right-sided member of the double pivot at pushing forward into the attack. And basically between Morris and Rusnak and Ferreira and especially Roldan, all those guys were pushing forward and finding really clever pockets of space off the ball. And Roldan was, I think, the best at it, or at least the most impactful. Where it's that third goal. It's the Musovski goal in the 41st minute. Seattle in possession high up the field. And Christian Roldan makes two different third-man runs. Like he's moving off the ball as two of his teammates are passing to be an option. Not once. He doesn't receive it in the first one. But he continues his run up the right, and that's when he receives it. It's the second run he makes as that third man. And he goes and gets into the Man City zone, cuts it back, and Musovski ends up scoring, and it's 3-0. Roldan, I thought, was essential in this game. I thought he was absolutely fantastic. And he was a part of the Sounders' general game plan of we need to stack numbers between the lines because in Game 1, we just didn't do enough. We didn't take enough risks. We weren't effective enough going forward. I think they can do it again. I didn't have the Sounders winning MLS Cup, but I think this was an MLS Cup-worthy performance. Like I think if the Sounders play like this more moving forward, they very much have a chance to win MLS Cup. So, Jeff, it sounds like you and I are both thinking Seattle will take Game 3. Am I wildly off on that?
If they've learned the lessons and can apply them, yes, I think that they'll win Game 3. I'm not backing off of that. I think one other thing that I'd identified with Ari is that they actually had one of the Roldan-Vargas partnership has been crucial throughout the season for Seattle, right? Because it's been two midfielders doing the work of three is nominally their excuse for being able to fortify defensively and in the forward final third with more players because they're confident they don't need a third player in there. Well, they actually had like their second worst performance of the season, I would argue, against Minnesota in Game 1. They only won 39.5% of their duels. That was, again, the second lowest performance, behind a loss in Austin. They flipped that in this last game, and they actually won 60% of them, which is, a rounding error away from being their best performance of the season, which came back against Dallas in May. So if they figured it out, if they're applying these lessons, and if they have learned the lessons and really studied that tape from stoppage time, because that was kind of their big bugaboo window, and it was deserved because Seattle's big issue defensively has been in transition, and they don't have the pace. They don't have the backtracking legs at this point with Reagan and Yamar and Nuhu and Alex Roldan. Roldan's probably the best at this. He is definitely the best at this, and you saw this in the first half when he did a really good seal off down the wing, but the trade-off here is that he's on the right flank, and so he can't cover the entirety of the terrain. If they get their structure right so they aren't caught as unaware on the break, I think that they'll match up really well against Minnesota, and I think San Diego still gets through, so I'm kind of jumping segments here, but I think that Seattle still would project okay against San Diego as it constructs. So I'm still predicting Seattle gets through.
Yeah, I am as well. I would be surprised if we didn't see Minnesota United be a bit more aggressive after how easily they were picked apart in a way we just haven't seen very often at first halves, especially throughout 2025. But I do think Seattle will go ahead and push this series forward. We will find out what happens with all of these Game 2s after this upcoming weekend. Jeff, let's do another Game 3, this upcoming weekend. Jeff, let's do another series, bouncing over to the Eastern Conference. Another game involving a team that scored 4 goals. The Columbus Crew 4, FC Cincinnati 0. That's got this series back to level footing. Jeff, I don't think you can ask for a much better performance if you're a Columbus Crew fan. They allowed basically 0 shots. 1 shot was recorded. That 1 shot questionable, I suppose.
Yeah.
A charitable move by the statistician, let's put it that way, if towards FC Cincinnati. At the same time, I think if you are a Cincinnati fan, you can't really imagine a worse performance than how things quickly snowballed into an utter doomable performance if you're Cincinnati. Was this game more about the Crew being great or more about Cincy being awful in your mind? Where do you fall?
I think that this was a more locked-in Crew performance than we've seen for most of this year. It felt like a bit of a throwback. It felt like you were watching tape from 2023 in some ways, and you can't see the jersey numbers, and the tape is all grainy and stuff, so you're excused for not recognizing who's on the field in terms of personnel. Like, make no mistake, Cincinnati made mistakes. But the thing is, the Crew were also much more intentional. One story of the Crew in 2025 has been kind of wasteful with their opportunities and not being able to catalyze all of their good build-up play into something actionable in the final third. And a lot of that comes down to personnel, right? And the rotations that they've had in the attacking midfield spots beneath the striker, Diego Rossi being the line leader, not really doing Cucho things on the ball necessarily, or off the ball especially. But what you were able to see is that Max Arston performance that Pochettino has come to love with the U.S. men's national team, where once you shunt him even further afield, which is how Wilfred Nancy, to his credit, has always been using Max Arston and his wingbacks in this structure, give them more license to go forward with the peace of mind that you have three center backs behind them to help cover some ground. And I think Arston had a much better game here. Good to see that Darlington Nagbe's career won't end with a sweep. Now we got to spin it forward and these sorts of things. But I also thought, yes, Patrick Schulte didn't have a ton to do, but I think that there was just maybe a little bit more calmness because he wasn't as overworked. And I think right now Schulte is someone who has shown, or at least at his best, he can do well even when he's not getting peppered with shots regularly and sort of getting warmed up in real time by the opponent. So he didn't even have to take that sort of test in this game. To be fair, it's like that's pretty much just giving goalkeeper a credit for showing up and punching in, punching out at the end of the shift. But he's still on the field, so there's that. Joe, I don't know. Am I being too kind to Columbus and especially too kind to Cincinnati here, because they were not ready for a playoff game? I'll say that.
No, yes and no is my answer to that question. I do think this game was more defined by Cincinnati being just not in it than it was about Columbus being great. Now, the game really shifts when Yuya Kubo gets sent off in the first half, because he's having to cover for Samuel Gidi turnover, and he gets a dog red card. Columbus then have a free kick. Dylan Shambo scores it. It's 2-0, and the game is over. It feels over at that point.
Yeah.
Columbus continued to dominate from that point forward. Even before those mistakes, where it's not just that issue from Kubo that's caused by a teammate. It's also Alvis Powell getting body off the ball by Diego Rossi, which shouldn't happen. And that leads to the Arston goal, and Arston scoring, and you talked about his effect in this game.
Yeah,
even before those mistakes happened, Columbus were the better team. They were controlling the game. They didn't allow chances before that either. I mean, before or after the red card. They were finding answers to Cincinnati's press also, which I think was really important for Columbus in this game. But even while Columbus were the better team, Cincinnati handed them the game on a silver platter. Like, both of those things can sort of be true.
Yeah, sure.
Which is why, there was probably no great answer to the question that I asked you in the first place.
Which is Cincinnati, fun for podcasting.
It's true. It's true, Jeff. Very theoretical. I think Cincinnati were incredibly poor in this game, and at the same time, I can hold that truth, and I can also hold this truth that I wouldn't make a massive sweeping change if I was Pat Noonan for Game 3. Obviously he's going to have a left wing back to change because Kubo can't play. But I don't think that there were huge structural issues to what Cincinnati were doing. Now, they were getting played through in the press, and I talked about that briefly. Columbus were finding that Cincinnati came in and pressed man-to-man in a lot of the field. So they flattened out it's usually a 1-2 with Evander in behind two strikers. They flattened that out, which they do fairly often, I suppose, into just a flat front three. And so it was a 3-4-3 in defense for Cincinnati when they pressed. And their front three matched up with Columbus's three center backs. It was wing back to wing back. It was center mid to center mid. And so all those matchups were there. Where Cincinnati weren't going man-to-man was when one of Taha Brun, who started on the left for this game, still no Daniel Gazdag in the 11, or Diego Rossi dropped in. And so when those players would drop in, the Cincy center backs weren't eager to go and track those players because for whatever reason, they were worried about getting beaten in behind. I don't think that should have been maybe quite as big of a concern as it seemed to be.
I agree with you.
Either way, maybe there's a little bit of a tweak there to the press if you're Cincinnati. But Columbus, it's not like Columbus was creating chance after chance off of those really nice press-beating build-up sequences. They found looks and they progressed the ball, but they didn't break the game wide open. So if I'm Cincinnati, weirdly, after a 4-0, I know this sounds wrong, I'm not making huge changes. I still feel somewhat confident heading into Game 3, less than I did before Game 2. But I'm still feeling somewhat confident heading into Game 3 because I don't think that you royally screwed anything up on the tactical side, other than cleaning up mistakes, which just shouldn't be happening at this stage of the season. I don't think there's a whole lot for this team to do. Jeff, am I still crazy for backing Cincinnati in Game 3?
No, and I predicted that Columbus would get through this, but I feel like it's more likely Cincinnati comes out of Game 3 because I don't think that there's another chance that the Crew, we just haven't seen them, to go back to my first point of this looked like 2023. We haven't seen enough of this version of the Crew where I'm confident that they can wrestle a game into a lower octane version of what they put together in game 2. I'm not confident they can go to Cincinnati and get 66% possession like they did in this game, or maybe scale that down to 62% or 60% of actionable possession that they're also then utilizing and not just getting in dead areas after Cincinnati has scored 2 and trying to ice the game, right? I don't think that Cincinnati, you laid out really well their changes in team structure here and how it was a little bit more defensive and kind of preparing for a counterattacking opponent that didn't really show up or didn't need to show up, frankly, in this game. But I think when they go back to their usual base shape, they're more proactive, which is going to help solve a lot of these issues of breaking lines and being able to retain the ball and actually challenge Patrick Schulte. So I do think Cincinnati does have an advantage here. That said, if this version of Columbus shows up, I'm with you. It's kind of strange that they do keep rotating in on those attacking midfielders at this point of the season. You would think that they would know their best front three, but they didn't. And to be fair, what evidence did they have to make that decision? So I'll be really curious to see if it is Habrun, if it is Gazdag, if Russell Rowe comes in and Rossi drops back a line or something. But I think it's still going to be must watch. I really do. But I would say that, this continues a trend of game 2 being probably, I always lose sight of this, probably the most fun batch of games, just because neither team has anything to lose. Because if you win, you advance, and you did it with panache. And if you lose, so if you're walking in the team with the advantage, whatever. If you win, you advance, great. If you lose, well, you got another chance, and you'll go back home probably, because you probably were the higher seed. If you lost game 1, you also have nothing to lose, so you might as well go for it. And I think you could see that in pretty much all of these games over the course of this matchup, except for New York City versus Charlotte, who just didn't get that memo. But in their defense, they were one of the first series to kick off the second game. So, overall, I think it still is Cincinnati's to get through, but I saw from the crew in this game what I hope to see to get them to advance. So I'm leaving the door open.
Yeah, Wilfred Ansay has talked, as relayed by the Apple TV broadcast, he's talked about how this is his most complete Columbus Crew team ever, which I just completely disagree with.
Yeah,
that feels like some very, very polite framing from Wilfred Ansay for what I think is very clearly his worst Columbus Crew team ever. But they are not so much worse than past versions of the Crew that they can't still put in a dazzling performance. So I think Game 3 is going to be so much fun. I'm stoked for these series-deciding games. This one maybe more than any of the others. I'm also wondering if Patrick Schulte would not prefer to be called Little Pat. If we've got Big Pat, Pat Ajiman with the USMNT, Schulte's in and around these camps too. I think Big Pat and Little Pat needs to become some sort of buddy cop thing that we all watch and all are going to enjoy over time. Jeff, something else that I think we'll all enjoy? These messages from our delightful sponsors. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to come back after these great messages that I'm sure everyone is going to listen to in full. We'll be right back. All right, folks, we are back. Those were lovely, weren't they? I mean, I liked the first one and the second one and maybe the third one as well. I liked them all the same. Jeff, let's talk about another series, the third one that we're going to talk about on today's show. Portland Timbers 2, San Diego FC 2, forcing a Game 3 that's headed back to San Diego because Portland managed to win this game in a shootout. This was another wild game where it looked like I was going to be right for calling this series over after Game 1 because San Diego were up 2-1 deep in second half stoppage time. And then Gage Guerrero says, nah, Joe, you're an idiot. And he equalizes late, basically at the death. Portland ended up winning the shootout. It's a wild game. Jeff, I am a fool. That's okay. You can't get every prediction right. I also said that Detroit City had no chance to beat Louisville City in the USL Championship playoffs as Lou City being the best team in USL history. Yeah, I was wrong. And we had a great listener point out how bad I am at making predictions, which is true. I'm bad at it, Jeff. I'm bad here. How did Portland work their way back into the series? What happened to change the last two results that the Timbers have had against San Diego, which was getting blown out in decision day and losing Game 1 very handily as well, as we talked about 1 week ago?
First of all, I think that you're justified, though I will say that the best team in the USL history tends to struggle in the playoffs. Just ask Alan Koch's FC Cincinnati, and I think was one vintage of the Phoenix Rising that had a case to be made as well. As for Portland, I mean, this is kind of how Portland has been trying to win games throughout the season. And I saw a lot of frustration towards the end of the regular season from the Portland Timbers contingent about how opportunistic they needed to be, about how random their results seemed to be, where, they would put in these credible performances against good opponents, and that they would play against opponents that their fans believe were worse than them, the teams that missed the playoffs, and really struggle. And there was no sort of dependability from one week to next of how they played. And they kind of did that here. They were kind of left to snatch at chances again. They had 17 shots. They outshot San Diego 17-9, but they weren't great looks by and large. It was a lot of kind of, 5% chances, 4% chances, 8% chances. A lot of lottery tickets in there that you're just kind of scratching and hoping to find the 2,500. And eventually, breaks their way. 71% passing, so also pretty ugly in possession and not really able to string much together. But final seconds here, you're able to get a good chance set up. You set up a big chance for Guerra there, and he's able to head it past the backup goalkeeper, because we should also acknowledge that this game did have a really ugly sort of momentum shifting moment. Granted, it's still 1-0 at the time. I think Portland had already scored the opener. Velta had scored in his second straight playoff game, which should also be cited. CJ Dos Santos dives head first, trying to go for a ball. Kevin Kelsey swings a leg. Nothing in it, nothing to it. It's not like he was swinging a leg at the goalkeeper. He was absolutely trying to connect on the ball. Didn't see that the goalkeeper had, left ground and was pursuing the ball and defenseless here. Hits him in the head, ends up needing to get subbed off. Really ugly. I hope CJ Dos Santos is okay. I hope it's a quick
fractured
recovery.
cheekbone. So we don't know what the timeline is going to be for that, but San Diego could be without a goalkeeper who, Jeff, sorry for the brief aside. I know you've been critical of Dos Santos, and I think it's been warranted at times this year. I'm of the opinion that by and large he has been a useful player for San Diego.
Second, he still starts for a reason, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, very much starts for a reason. 2 goals saved above expected this year. He's 8th among MLS goalkeepers in save percentage. And then Cisniega comes on, and this was a common theme from these game 2s. Almost gave up a goal with a pass and sort of misplay out of the back in his first sort of action on the field. So that is, if Dos Santos can't play in game 3, that is like a huge, huge momentum builder for Portland. Anyway, pick up where you left off.
Yeah, and granted, look, Pellegrino then scores again in his second consecutive game of the postseason. Corey Baird gets subbed off at halftime after dishing out the assist on that Pellegrino goal. Chucky Lozano comes in, scores really quickly, which is also just like a really good moment for Vibes. Kisses the badge. Everything's fixed. We've done it. The comeback complete. It's 2-1. Pravi Park. We own you. And then no, they give up a late goal here. And that is where you get back to like the sort of San Diego not being quite as ironclad of a contender as their standing in the West maybe indicated. And we saw a little bit of this when they lost to Minnesota in September, but I think this is maybe more worrying because Portland is not in that contender class everyone had, whereas Seattle was, or Minnesota was in September, and maybe still is. So, as for game 3, I still think San Diego this is the scare they maybe need, but also I think some of the scare was completely out of their control once Dos Santos left his feet. And I think that scenario, it's understandable a team would kind of drop that last minute sort of moment if they don't have their starting goalkeeper in there, or a guy who showed up to the stadium not expecting to play that day, as the case with Cisniega, no fault of his own. So I'm still confident San Diego gets through this one, but this is why I'm not confident that they get past Seattle or Minnesota in the second round.
No, I think that's reasonable. I think San Diego very much have a chance still to make a huge run, but these injuries are a question mark, man, to everything that you just said. Dos Santos, we don't know what his recovery timeline is going to be. I mean, it's possible that he plays right away. It's also possible that he very much doesn't. I don't know. And that San Diego don't just lose one player, but they also lose Luca Bambino to some sort of injury 3 minutes into the second half. Franco Negri comes on for him at left back. I don't know what the prognosis is there either. I imagine we'll learn more about that in the coming days ahead of Game 3. It's a challenge. Now, that they get Lozano back is really big because I think he's still, as much as I do like Amal Pellegrino's game, and was hoping that he was going to be delightful for San Jose when he comes over from Norway. That hasn't quite happened, and he is not Chucky Lozano. I think getting those guys back would be huge. I want to give credit to Portland, though, in all of this at the same time, where I think they did make a bit of their own luck in this game. And the way that I think they did that, Jeff, is with how aggressively they pressed. If you think back to Game 1, Portland sat in a very mid 4-4-2 block. Not mid in that it was mediocre, although I suppose it is. But in that it was it was a mid block in Game 1. In Game 2, it was not that at all for long stretches. It was a high press where they are up and they're pressing man-to-man in a lot of the field, but a little hybrid in other parts of the field. So it was Kelsey and it was Velda who would go and press San Diego's 2 center backs. And then you would have 2 players go up and deal with the fullback. So Anthony on one side was going up to press Pilcher, and it was Mosquera on the other side. So it was the left winger and the right back going to press the outside backs for San Diego. And then Portland went man-to-man in midfield. So it was DaCosta, Ajala, and Chara who were going man-to-man with San Diego's midfield 3. And San Diego didn't really have answers which is quite rare for them in a moment where they're being pressed, because they are probably the league's best or second best to Columbus build-up team. But Portland, to their credit, they created a number of turnovers, and not just the first half, but also in the second half, by going and pressing high and either forcing long balls from San Diego, where San Diego don't have the physicality in their attacking line to deal with really like bringing those balls down and winning them and establishing them higher up the field. Either forcing long balls for Portland or just forcing turnovers off of sloppy, oppressed sort of moments. I was really impressed by that. And if I'm Phil Neville, I'm feeling really good about the game plan for Game 2. I'm doing the same thing in Game 3. I don't think you can sit deep or sit in a mid-block against the San Diego team. I think you need to either sit crazy low, like Minnesota low, or you need to go and press them, like Portland did in this game. And I would just take the leverage that you earned from this result and how you got it, where you were reasonably deserving of a result in this game. I think San Diego were also, like, this was a draw. This felt like a draw sort of game.
It felt like
was decided by a shootout, right? So I think it was a reasonable scoreline ultimately. But Portland pulled out something that I didn't think they would. They executed it to a level that I didn't think they would. And San Diego struggled with it more than I think they would. So that for me is the big story heading into Game 3. I still think San Diego will win, but I wouldn't be shocked if Portland give them some challenges on the ball with their high press. So I was really impressed by that, all things considered. And I'm giving Portland a little bit more of an edge than I thought heading into Game 3, while still thinking that San Diego have the bigger edge, all things considered. So
I think that's a good way to put it.
Impressed by that.
Yeah, I think Portland has a better chance of advancing than Chicago as the 8th seed on the other side of the bracket. I'll put it that way. But
I do too, Jeff, and that's not at all just because the Chicago Fire are already eliminated.
That's right.
Maybe it's not because of that.
Maybe it's also other things. I think that one other thing to keep in mind here, Portland does have a physical advantage, and like it was a 50-50 dual balance. Portland won 61% of area balls. And so I think that there is something, Finn Sermon, I thought, had a really fantastic season. He was part of my 22 under 22 ballot. I thought that he's really evolved in a nice way for Portland and New Zealand, where, he's going to be a crucial piece for both as long as he's around in each program, respectively. But, you've got to be able to play it to four heads if you have, him, Zuperich, Miller along the back. That's a pretty advantageous, forward line, especially against such a like kind of nimble and shorter, dynamic, keep the ball on the ground sort of forward line that San Diego has. So I won't surprise me if they are trying to set up for set pieces a little bit more in Game 3. I think it's their best path forward to try to play the four heads. But yeah, I'm with you, man. As it stands, I'm pretty confident that San Diego can get by. But the injury scares from this game.
Yep.
We'll see how the preparations change just as different personnel come in and as there are more questions about whether or not Dos Santos and Pompino will be able to play.
Agreed. All right, let's shift over to the Eastern Conference. Nashville SC 2, Inter Miami 1. This forced a Game 3 over in the East. Jeff, this, to me, looked like a much better performance from Nashville, where they were more aggressive. It looked like a team that was back at home and felt very comfortable playing at home. They were more assertive in basically every phase of the game. They go up 2-0 in the first half, and the flow of the game never really changes from there, even though Messi and Miami get a goal back in the second half. Did you expect this sort of fight from Nashville in Game 2? Because I'll admit, I sort of thought Miami were going to take this game and that the series was probably going to be over, but that is not at all how it played out.
Yeah, it's this weird one where it's Game 2, but it's the third straight game between these two teams, because keep in mind of Decision Day for listeners. So, like after such a big loss in Decision Day and such a big loss in Game 1, it wouldn't have surprised me if Nashville was just kind of like, well, I guess we're just going to kind of march out there and we're going to go out with our heads held high and we might lose 3-1, and that's fine. But, a good structure, introducing another center back, for BJ Callahan, and I think that certainly did help with the defensive bedrock. The midfield, I don't know, they did kind of seed some ability, therefore, in the midfield, and as they broke lines, it was a little more difficult without that third body in there. But it got to the final third eventually. Andy Nahar was maybe pushed a little bit further up, which does generally help their game model. Sam Surge scores a goal. Josh Bauer scores a goal. I don't know. I mean, like, it was just, it was better. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to diminish this. And I think that there was a lot of really good chance creation. Like, this was a quality over quantity, whereas Portland's model was much more quantity over quality of all of the chances, right? I think 10 shots to 11, 2.1 XG to 1.8. Like, both Nashville and Miami were setting up really good looks for themselves, and Nashville was able to get two of them in, and Miami got one of them in the 90th minute. Yep. So, they're easy jokes to write about Apple Skip writers needing to make sure there was a third episode of this series just for the Messi documentary and padding the runtime of it that they're going to have when he wins MLS Cup. We'll see. We'll see if that happens. Yeah. But no, overall, like, again, credit to Nashville. They were a better team than their first two clashes with Miami, if this series, counting Decision Day, of course, have gone. I'm glad they didn't get swept. I think that would have been a pretty sour way for such a promising season to go for them. But I don't know. Am I kind of being a little too defeatist about this still, Joe? Did they show you enough where you're like, yeah, they're going to be able to go back to Fort Lauderdale and wreck some stuff?
I think they very much have a chance, and I probably feel a little bit more bullish about them than you do by what it sounds like. I mean, Miami will still be favored in Game 3, right? I mean, the whole reason I picked Miami to win MLS Cup is that they have one of the best attacks we've ever seen in MLS, and I thought this team would care too much in round one to get swept in back-to-back years. And I still believe all of that fundamentally. What I will say is Nashville did a lot of stuff right in this game. I thought they pressed fairly cohesively. They have across both Game 1 and Game 2, even though Game 1 wasn't like a shining performance in them across the board, they have kept Messi quieter than I expected. Which again, Messi's still dropping incredible moments. He has some absurd one-touch through ball down to Jordi Alba in the first half of this game. I mean, he is still doing stupid MVP stuff. I want to be clear about that. But Messi's touch count has not been especially high for Lionel Messi. He has had 45 touches in Game 1, 48 touches in Game 2. You mentioned that these teams also played on decision day. He had 62 touches on decision day. So he had about 15 more touches on decision day than he did in this Game 2 victory for Nashville. Really impressive. You go back and look at Messi's touch count throughout the course of this season. He hasn't had less than 45 touches in a start all year long. All year long. So Nashville we didn't see quite the same 4-3-3 attacking structure in this game. We did still see a 4-3-3 defensively. And BJ Callahan talked to media. This was over at 615 Soccer, where folks should go check out. Ben Wright had this in an article after Game 1. Callahan talked about how we wanted to have this different defensive shape because we think that forces Miami to play wide. And I do think we saw Messi go and drift to find space, and he didn't look quite as comfortable as he did certainly on decision day and as he has other times this season. So I'm impressed by how the defensive structure does seem to be working for Nashville in this series. I will look at the other side, though, for Miami, and say there was a lot of self-imposed problems that we saw on this team. The one I keep thinking about, Jeff, is what if Miami had just kept Drake Callender and maybe actually played him instead of sending him off to Charlotte because they had to sign Messi's boy and Oscar Ustari, and now it's Rocco Rios Novo, Phoenix Rising legend, to be very clear, Rocco Rios Novo.
That's right.
But he concedes the penalty that very much changes this game. I mean, there had been almost no soccer played between stoppages, and Eddie Tagset set the tone early, kicking the ball right at Ian Frey after the play had already stopped. Ian Frey makes a meal out of it. There's a little scuffle, and then eventually we reset. And it's very quickly after that Sam Sturridge gets in behind. Rios Novo does make contact. It's a clear penalty call, and Nashville go up 1-0. Well, what if that was a very good, certainly above average MLS starting goalkeeper in Drake Callender, who was immense to your record-setting season last year, that you just kept instead of playing two different goalkeepers over him? That's the kind of stuff that's preventable for Miami. It's preventable that they look maybe a bit better in build-up in this game, where there were just giant distances between players, where there's just no excuse for a midfield with DePaul and Busquets, although Busquets is playing mostly between the center backs in this game. There's no excuse for this team with as much technical quality as they have to be as sloppy as they were on the ball in this game. Like, it is, they don't look well-drilled, they don't look well-defined, and that is the duality of Inter Miami, where in one moment they look like they have their entire destiny in their own hands and they're going to go out and dominate on the way to MLS Cup. And the other moment, I remember distinctly earlier this season, Taylor Rockwell asking us if this team was good, and us being like, I'm not sure. They don't look very good a lot of the time. That's still Miami, and that I think is why this Game 3 is going to be a lot of fun. I still lean towards the folks in Fort Lauderdale. Jeff, I know you do too. But, I mean, this game, credit to Nashville, man, because I thought they did a lot of good stuff. I'm just not ultimately convinced that it's going to matter for them.
Yeah, I think that the big numbers, you laid out his touch deficiencies quite well in this game, Lionel Messi, and I think that it's also worth flagging that his pass accuracy in the final third was down to 54.5%, which was the second lowest rate that he's had in MLS this year. Each of his four worst attacking third passing rate games, Miami has lost, and he's played 90 minutes in each of those games. So that is, a visit from Chicago at the end of September, but it's also a trip to Charlotte in September, and it's a trip to Cincinnati in July. So it looks like good teams are starting to figure out a way to frustrate him in the final third. If Nashville can continue to do that sort of thing, I think you're right. They do still have that ability to play spoiler because of Miami getting in its own way sometime. I completely agree with you that this game is very different. The series feels different with Drake Callender. I still think that Miami has just enough to get through to the next round.
Yeah, we'll see. I won't be shocked either way, to be totally honest. I think Nashville are every bit good enough to get this result, but that they have to go on the road will make things difficult for them. Jeff, let's finish out the game twos that didn't result in sweeps. So let's head to New York City, the great city of New York City. NYC FC 0, Charlotte FC 0. a game that Charlotte win in a lengthy penalty shootout. Jeff, Wilf Zaha was back for this game on the left wing after serving a suspension. Was he? Okay, well, that sort of answers my question. What did you make of his Charlotte FC team? And like, did you actually notice him on the field? Because I didn't really notice him.
No. Yeah, and that's so frustrating because then you look at the numbers afterwards and he's like, oh, he actually had by far the most touches of anyone who was attacking. Oh, okay. Like, it was a lot of getting Wilf Zaha the ball, but not in areas where Wilf Zaha wants the ball or needs the ball or is best with the ball, right? Like, I think that it was just a very anonymous performance, and it was two teams that were set up really well for a penalty shootout on the day. And that feels like a squandered opportunity much more for New York City than it does for Charlotte, I will say. Because I think that when you look at the balance of this series, to win a first round in this format, you need to break serve. If you're a low seed, and New York comes in as the 5 seed, so they are the low seed. And they're unable to capitalize on this chance. And they aren't able to do the sort of like proactive, fun, effective sort of play that they can do. And it usually just requires them to play a lot of really good balls, either up the flank through Nico Fernandez or to get Maxi Morales cooking or whatever the case may be. But just to get the ball on the ground, low crosses right in front of Alonso Martinez has been such a consistent, dependable font of goal scoring this year. They just weren't set up that way. It was such an ugly game. It was such a... I don't know. It was all those things that people say about, like, why is this format happening? Why is the soccer isn't even... They're going to point at this game and they're going to laugh at this game, and it's going to be harsh because you look at all the other game twos of these series, every single one of them, and they're more entertaining than this, but it feels like a squandered opportunity. And this was sort of the reminder that this New York City, it is sort of a rebuilding year. It is sort of a changeover from the Dyla and Cushing team core and trying to turn it into whatever Pascal Jensen's going to be doing. So excited to see what comes next, but... worried about their return now to Charlotte. I think it's a little difficult to project that they're going to win 2 games there, but maybe I'm wrong.
Well, the flip side is that Charlotte don't look any good either. I mean, right? I mean, Charlotte were not good in this game. Zaha was invisible, as we've already talked about. Really, since Pep Biel went down in Leagues Cup, this Charlotte team has not been super great. I mean, they've had good moments, and they finished out that win streak in regular season play after Leagues Cup. But really, they don't have a ton of quality in this team, where Wilf Zaha is just not been good, really, in 2025, certainly not as a DP. And so when they don't have Biel to pull the strings, they don't have the quality to go and create consistent chances. So they didn't in Game 2 against a team like NYC FC. That Pascal Janssen, and Jeff, you were getting to a lot of this, he's been so conservative with his personnel, where he hasn't really tried to open games up. And I mean, they were a penalty kick or 2 away from that working and us praising him for that. But I do think even still the margins, NYCFC left the margins too close in this game against Charlotte, where really the attacking quality that Pascal Janssen has on the field, it's Alonso Martinez, it's Nico Fernandez, and it's Maxi Morales. It's basically 3 attackers for them. And Kevin O'Toole and Tavon Gray are getting high and wide, and those guys just aren't dangerous attacking presences for your team. There's no way you slice it where that seems especially scary. I don't think Fernandez has really quite found himself in this team just yet.
Not consistently,
I agree. Not consistently, yeah. And Alonso Martinez had a great moment in Game 1, but he does need help. Like, he is a striker that does need service. And I just don't think there was enough of that in this game. I think there was something that NYCFC left on the field that they didn't have to in this match. And that's the real frustration for them and for me coming out of this game. I do think they will still take Game 3. That is my prediction. I think they will win this series just because I genuinely don't think this version of Charlotte FC is a playoff team. Like, I think Orlando is a better team than them. I think you run through a bunch of other teams, whether they didn't make the playoffs or they're already eliminated. I think Charlotte are fortunate in that they were good enough at the beginning of the year to earn that 4th seed, and they had enough form, and Christian Kalina is good enough that they could withstand enough of their other issues to still hang out in the top 4 in the East, which is a real credit to them. I'm not trying to throw everything out here for Charlotte, but I don't think this version of Charlotte, the one that we're seeing now in this series, is good enough to win a playoff series.
And I think that some of that diagnosis, which I fully agree with, does come down to Dean Smith as well, who I think made some really frustrating decisions with both his lineup and his structure, and frankly, his personnel changes or complete lack thereof. Remember, this is the series that had the least rest between games 1 and 2. There were just 4 days between the first game, which was on a Tuesday, I believe, which is just ridiculous, and then the second game, which was on the Saturday. And just 1 sub coming in the 75th minute. They pull Brant Bronico, they bring a good win, and that's it. And that's the only change. And that tells me a few different things, but it also tells me that he doesn't seem very trusting of more than 11 or 12 of his players. And at that point, are you sure he even trusts all 11 who are on the field starting? You know what I mean? Like, it just looks like a coach who's not happy with the roster, but when it's your second year with this and you've had such a big role in bringing in the personnel, I get that injuries happen. I get the transfers, outbound transfers happen mid-season as well, and you don't always have a replacement in the wings, but man, it is frustrating to see. You know, I'm completely with you. The Charlotte team looks like they're very out of ideas. They're trying to ride their luck and get to clean in penalties. If they try to do that again, I think Matt Freese will be more up to it the second time. I wouldn't want to go into back-to-back shootouts against Matt Freese either, bear in mind. So I do agree with you. I think that New York played to their opponent in that game is probably the best way to use that cliche. And it's a disservice to what they can do or what I thought they can do, and maybe they're just not ready to do that all the time yet, much like we're saying about Nashville in the last segment.
Yeah, I am ready, Jeff, however, unlike NYC FC, to take a break. So let's go ahead and take a break. We'll come back and we'll look at the decided series. We'll look at the three teams that swept, the teams they swept, all that and more coming up after the break. Stay with us. Hey, we're back. Me, Jeff, you listener, all three of us hanging out together, unless you're listening in a group, in which case the other people in the group are also hanging out with us. We're not excluding them. Everybody's listening, but also maybe put in headphones. I don't know. Do whatever you want to do. Jeff, let's move to the games that have already been decided, the series, I should say, that have already been decided. Austin FC 1, LAFC 4. This series is over. Austin were swept. That game 1 definitely happened. We talked about it. You don't remember it, listener. I don't know why, but we did talk about it. It's very real. Game 1 was tight in this series, Jeff. Game 2 was not. LAFC went from not their best to much more imposing, I think, from game 1 to game 2, as the scoreline indicates. How good do you think this LAFC team should be feeling after finishing off this week?
I think they should be feeling really good. I think that this was about what we expected, though, from this series, which was that there was a clear talent mismatch, and it was going to be a matter of if LAFC takes those opportunities. And LAFC did a little bit of its like kind of big game conservation act, but it wasn't a turtle shell. And that's all it needs to be, right? And this is sort of my question I had coming into the playoffs, which is every time we get to this time of year, Steve Cherundolo shows like an 80% intensity version of what the team had done in the regular season, and that's the playoff model. And I think that this model still has legs against a team that doesn't have its defensive structure completely battened down. Like this is a really tough sort of like, hey, old friend sort of revival against Ilya Sanchez, who now has to do a lot of defensive work against opponents that, he used to play on the same team as, and also, maybe was told that you're not as much of a transition defender as you used to be against these guys, and now we're going to be throwing Son and Bouanga against you. I think that there still is just such clarity with how those two want to play together that I thought would maybe take them longer to put together, but that was much more to do with Bouanga, as I was saying at the time, than Son. Was the idea of, Bouanga didn't necessarily always play nice with Carlos Vela, but they were maybe trying to do more similar things, and I think Son is able to be more types of forwards than Carlos Vela was at that stage of his career, right? And sort of embrace different facets of his game. I will say, though, Austin was able to create some really good looks for themselves. Austin still generated 2.4 XG off of 8 shots. That's a remarkable average chance, right? That's a better average chance, frankly, in terms of likelihood of being converted most days than LAFC generated. So I still have some questions about LAFC's defense in that sense, because I don't think that we necessarily had the attacking talent in that lineup beyond Owen Wolf, where I would have assumed that would be the case for Austin's performance. But yeah, it just ultimately, they didn't have enough talent. We've been saying it all year. Their attack didn't have the guns, and they're done in 2 games, and that makes sense, and it feels like a just result.
I'll push back on Austin creating good chances. From open play, they did not. From the entire game,
That's
they
fair.
did. Right?
That's
the XG is almost completely bolstered by their 2 penalties. Mito Ozuni misses the first one. It's not a good penalty whatsoever. Yeah. And then Pereira makes the second one, and that makes it 3-1 before halftime.
But 6 looks with a 1.5, I'll take it. Like, you know what I mean? Like, that's what I'm saying. It's like they still did.
Something. There's still something in this game.
I see your
but
I see your
it's
point.
the same issues that have plagued Austin all year long. If we're going to do their postmortem very briefly, this is just a terribly constructed roster. And
yes,
it was blindingly obvious. It was blindingly obvious in preseason.
Yeah.
Right? Which, if I'm an Austin fan, man, I'm not feeling great about Rodolfo Borrell these days, because he goes out, and I don't care about the spend, right? We know that spend doesn't correlate to success in MLS. You can be a big spending team and be good. You can be a low spending team and be good. That's fine. Austin decided to be a big spending team. They splashed on Vasquez. They splashed on Uzuni. They'd already splashed on Bukhari the summer before.
That's right.
And Vasquez and Uzuni just don't make sense together unless they're going to go play boom ball, which Nico Estevez doesn't really do. This roster didn't have a playmaker in it for them to play 47% possession sort of soccer. I mean, it just wasn't there. And that made no sense. That they heaped as much responsibility as they did on a good young player in Owen Wolff makes no sense. The roster wasn't good enough for them to win a trophy this year. They didn't win a trophy. They are very clearly outside of the real contenders in MLS. That was true before the playoffs started. It's certainly true now. I'm really concerned about Rodolfo Borrell. I'm concerned about this roster because there's not a lot of top-end flexibility. I'm worried about Austin. They're very lucky. Don't get it twisted. They're very lucky that the West is as bad as it is. So that's where I'll leave Austin. For LAFC, in this game, I thought it was fascinating that Cherundolo changed his tactical approach. And I thought more than that, it was the right thing to do. Where in game one, they didn't really create a whole lot. Cherundolo was very conservative in that 3-5-2 shape. In this game, still a back three, although we see Jailson, who signed as a free agent for them really late in the season. Jailson starts over Nkosi Tafare, so Jailson's in the middle of the back line. I thought he looked fine. And the other more meaningful change was Matthew Choinière left the team, and it became just that two-man midfield of Delgado and Tillman. And Nathan Ordaz joined the front line. And it was a front three with Ordaz on the right, Son nominally through the middle, but kind of going where he wanted, and Bouanga on the left side. Yeah. And I think it was the obvious thing to do because you didn't create enough in game one to feel good about your performance, but it was the right thing to do, to go and get another attacking player on the field. Now, classic Steve Cherundolo that he chose the second most conservative option he possibly could have to put in that 11. Bowusi, I feel like, would have been the most conservative. Then he goes to Ordaz. And then it's like, oh, okay, I have my creative types on the bench that I'll just go and leave in the corner. That all felt very on brand. But I do want to credit Cherundolo because I think it was an important decision to make. It paid off for LAFC in this game. The truth for LAFC right now is that if you give them lanes to run into in transition, they will beat you. And that's what happened on both of the first two goals. Austin, try as they might, as conservative as Nico Estevez is at his core, it just didn't matter. LAFC, kind of like Philly and how I talked about them after game one of their series, and we'll get to them in just a second.
Yeah.
Like these teams are so good at what they're good at. And they're so good at creating the moments to find to hate you with what they're good at. Philly did it in game one against Chicago where the Fire set up to be defensive and to take away their transition and their press. They still scored 2 goals off of those sequences. LAFC the exact same thing in this game. Austin weren't trying to go and impress and leave all the space in behind. It didn't matter. LAFC scored 2 goals. I'm still really afraid of this team if I'm another team in the West or any team in MLS right now.
I am as well. And just to kind of close the loop on Austin FC, I'm scared about the squad construction. They only have 3 players from their senior roster whose contracts expire this year that I don't expect them. Because Danny Pereira and Brendan Hines-Ike are both up, and I would assume those get brought back. So only 3 spots to really work with. I am scared about Austin. Yep. I'm also scared about LAFC, but I will say that for LAFC, I think winning in 2 was maybe more mandatory for them than any team in this. Not because of anything of Austin, but because Denny Bouanga and Son Heung-min are almost certain to be going to their national teams and have to be flung to far parts of the world relative to where Los Angeles is. And so to give them this extra time to have some rest on the front end here and an extra week of sort of like, kind of walk through preparations or maybe go join your national teams from day one or whatever and spend a couple of days at the camp, just like hang out with your family and clear your head and whatever, and then come back because you won't have that time heading into the next round, the conference semifinal. I think that's going to do wonders for LAFC. I really do.
It's a great point, Jeff. Hadn't thought about that. Really, really good. Let's move to another team in the West. The team that LAFC will be facing in the next round. We're not going to preview that game by any means here.
No.
But it's the Vancouver Whitecaps because they beat FC Dallas on the road in penalties. It was 1-1 in regulation. This was a much tighter game than game one, where that game one was a 3-0 win for Vancouver. Incredibly lopsided. Vancouver, though, did just enough, even with Tate Johnson and Daniel Rios going out injured, just losing players left and right Vancouver, and it just doesn't seem to matter. Jeff, that's just the norm, I suppose, in Vancouver for this stage. Is it not of, oh yeah, we lost 2 players, that's all right, we'll be fine, we move on, and we're in the next round. That is just status quo, it feels like, for Vancouver these days.
It's been next man up all year, right? And especially with the defensive line here, and Ralph Priso obviously comes in with the late equalizer to force the shootout. But, I think that with Vancouver, there was more talent in the locker room than maybe we realized. Even before this year, right? Because I think that you're also seeing a lot of, that guy, he's still there, right? Whenever they're having to go into their bench, it's not necessarily these new signings that are coming in on like really short-term deals or anything like that. Look, credit to Dallas again for making this serious and giving their fans like almost an entire game's worth of feeling like they were going to beat one of the best teams in MLS across the duration of the season in all competitions. I still think that they know that they have a building block in Petar Musa. I still think that there are some guys, further back the field, Kaique, that Christian Kappas, that they're going to look at and say, like, yeah, okay, we've got something cooking here. And I think that this is a performance that they're going to be able to watch in the offseason and say, okay, so these are the areas we need to improve. To go back to how you had framed it, I think coming out of game one was just that sort of like, okay, if they get bum rushed by the Vancouver Whitecaps, does ownership just say, okay, well, we tried ambition and that didn't work out, so now we're going back to the full-on homegrown model with a couple of seniors. And I don't know, Joe. I think overall with Dallas, they've shown that there is something to build off of in a way that other teams like Austin were more concerned about from outside those top 5 in the West. And as for Vancouver, like this, they needed a scare. I think inevitably a good team is going to get a scare in a playoff bracket no matter what. They'll hope this was their scare. I'm not sure that this would even really qualify as a scare. I think it was just a pretty good game of soccer, and they were struggling to score until the final minute of it. But yeah, 15 more minutes for Ryan Gold, I guess, and then especially another week plus an international window to continue to reintegrate him into the team. I won't be surprised if I see him on the right wing for conference semifinal against LAFC, huh?
Yeah, Vancouver benefit from this huge gap. Shout out international break. Shout out this long playoffs that has the international break right in the middle of it. They definitely do benefit from that rest. There's no doubt about that. More than most teams in the postseason do. I thought Vancouver played fine in this game. They weren't great. They weren't as good as they were in game 1. Again, 2 players went down injured. They still won. I think we know what Vancouver are at this point. We'll do more on them later. Dallas, to very much close the loop on them, I'm thinking about how this season is going to be remembered for FC Dallas. And really, it will be primarily remembered as that weird Lucio Acosta year, right?
Yeah.
You're browsing his Wikipedia or his FBref, and it's like, oh, yeah, I remember he played for Dallas. I know the Atlas thing I remember, like you went down to Mexico. Okay, I got that. Oh, yeah, the Dallas thing. It'll be that first and foremost. But I think what actually matters more for Dallas about this season, how maybe it should be remembered, is as a wasted year of Petar Musa. That's what I think about, where
That's fair.
Dallas comes in and the Lucio Acosta move is sort of a win-now move. The rest of the roster wasn't ready for it. Lucio Acosta didn't seem like actually cared enough to be in Dallas in the first place, and that was probably doomed from before it started. But Petar Musa is 27 years old. He is very much desired, not just in the international market, but also within MLS. Now that cash flows are a thing, you can bet your bottom dollar that teams have called about Petar Musa or have somehow asked about how much it would take to acquire Petar Musa. If they're not doing their jobs. And I can assure you that those sorts of things have happened.
Here's my question for you, though. What's your valuation on Petar Musa in a cash market? In MLS. MLS team. So bear in mind here is $4 million for Dejan Joveljic, and it was $22 million for Emmanuel Ladilaz. Yeah. So using those two numbers as your sort of hint of quality, I mean, he's a more valuable striker than Emmanuel Ladilaz is. He fits more systems than Ladilaz does, too. Yeah, true. So, like
12, 15, somewhere in that range. I mean, if I'm Dallas, I'm asking for more than that, to be honest.
But I think that's kind of what I'm getting at, is I think that the cash transfer market this offseason, we should see some really big numbers if players like him are made available. And if you're Dallas, it'll be hard to resist the temptation, because that's what their entire structural model is built towards, is profit off of, developing and producing high quality players. And in this case, they found one, don't get me wrong. It's not like they developed him whatsoever in Frisco, but at the same point, I think that they were able to validate their initial outlay, which was $9.7 million that could rise to 13. So keep that in mind as well. That's what they initially spent on him. But I think that they have a player that if they want to, they can build around him. He's 27 if he wants to stay. If he's frustrated by how these first 2 years have gone and not confident about the direction, though, it could be one of the biggest questions of the offseason. It could be a genuine, totally one of the most important players in the league is suddenly hitting, the market. It's again, not to, poor Dallas fans here. It's not Luka Doncic necessarily, but at the same point, I think that this could be a really fascinating offseason storyline, especially with him having 2 years left on his deal, not one, where maybe he doesn't have as much leverage to make the determination himself.
Yeah. Petar Musa to the Lakers. Got it. Okay, that was my big takeaway. No, Musa, here are the names. Let me just toss out the names, and then we'll move to the next game, to the last game. The names I'm watching most closely in the cash transfer market. And there are other people that know more than me. But these are just names that I think people should pay attention to. Okay. Petar Musa is one name. Mm-hmm. Nico Sakiris is another name in San Jose. David Martinez is a name in LAFC, and Brian Gutierrez is a name in Chicago. Those are my four names.
Really?
Those are the names that I'm thinking about. And speaking of Chicago, Jeff, how's this, man? I mean, this is why they pay me the big bucks. Speaking of Chicago Fire 0, Philadelphia Union 3. This was game 2. It's over. Chicago close in game 1, not close in game 2. The story coming into this game that we didn't maybe know was as big of a story as it turned out to be was Chris Brady getting injured in training.
Yeah.
So it was Jeff Gall who started in this game between the sticks for Chicago. Unfortunately for him and for the Fire, he gives up 2 goals off of misplayed passes out of the back and just didn't quite look on the pace. Now, Chicago in general didn't look on the pace in this game. It was not just a goalkeeper who struggled, but it was basically everybody. Jeff, honestly, in your mind, do you think things could have gone more wrong for Chicago in this game? Because to be totally honest, I think this was actually the worst case scenario for the Fire.
Just about. Like, I can come up with a comedy of errors here, but like I think that this is even more painful than that, right? Because it just looked defeatist. I think that's maybe part of it too, is just like you had this opportunity in theory to wrestle the momentum from forcing the shootout in game one and giving Philly a credible scare. They just weren't able to get about it. And I mean, you already mentioned it with Jeff Gall coming in here. Born in Chicago, 32 years old, kind of a journeyman sort of nomadic sort of career until he ends up back here. He did play 680 minutes this year, so it's not like I know that there was some questions about how qualified he was for that start. He did play with this team, and I think they won 3, lost 4, drew 1 of his 8 games. But this was by far the wrong game to throw in a player who hasn't played since early July. Right? Like, you can just tell that this is someone who doesn't know where his defenders are going to be, isn't used to the current game model, isn't used to playing with some of these players at all, by the way, because I think at that point, by the time July happens, they're deep enough in the Open Cup where Chris Brady is starting every game as well, right? So, yeah, I mean, it was sloppy, it was ugly, there was nothing that he could do, didn't make a single save, faced 7 or 9 shots, 3 on goal. Philadelphia could pretty much just do whatever they wanted to do, and what they wanted to do was take the second half to kind of sit back and rest their legs, and there's just nothing Chicago could do to break them down at that point.
Yeah, it was so bad from Chicago. Like, whatever we said, it's not bad
I'm
enough.
being insanely kind because they're also from the Midwest. I know I am, but
that's just how it is. You can't throw those elbows. They're soft.
We say that performance was interesting, not bad.
It was an interesting to the max performance from Chicago. I mean, Berhalter makes a sub 25 minutes into this game, which I think tells you a little bit more, where you get Pinedo on for Kwame. Kwame was terrible in this game to begin. Passes out of bounds in the 4th minute. There's another one in the 7th minute. He plays the ball backwards to Gal for Baribo's opener. I mean, it's so bad. And it wasn't just Kwame. It wasn't just Gal. It's Chicago in general. Like, they can't play through Philly's press. The structure's all wrong. Zinkernagel and Jonathan Dean are having the ball pop up on them. Jack Elliott hitting the ball out of bounds. I mean, it was honestly like a preseason game. It looked like that sort of thing from Chicago, where they were just so not in it. Brian Gutierrez has a penalty saved by Andre Blake that could have brought them back into this game at least a little bit. This to me was Philly were more consistent in their performance. And I think quality and consistency are linked in a way that we don't often think about or talk about, where what makes the great players great is their ability to execute on a regular basis, right? I mean, other players can hit that crazy one-touch through ball that I talked about Lionel Messi hitting to Jordi Alba earlier in the show. Other players cannot hit it at the frequency that Lionel Messi hits it. And the Fire on their day, I think, are able to play with the Union. We saw that in Game 1. On their day, they're absolutely able to do that. But they're not as consistent of a team as the Philadelphia Union are at this stage. This was a matchup between the two most improved teams in MLS as a whole, based off of points per game improvement from last year to this year. And the team that was most improved, based on the numbers, was the Philadelphia Union, and they were the team that won this whole darn thing, Jeff. I mean, I think it was deserved. I don't really even think we can argue.
No, but I think that if you're looking for Chicago and your best player stepping up in big games, I think that the one stat that you're going to also look at from this game, your front three, Jonathan Bamba, Hugo Kuipers, Philip Zinkernagel, a lot of investment in that, a lot of trust in that, they combined for 1 shot in this game, and they played all 270 minutes. Aggregate between the three of them. So how do you get the ball to them? How do you actually set them up in space to do these sorts of things? It's going to be a big question. It's going to have a lot to do with determining how they do next year, because Kuipers also came in the same winter as Petar Musa. I'm sure that you still build around him. I think that he still works in the game model really well.
Agreed. Totally agreed.
Zinkernagel and Bamba, I would expect that. Bamba will maybe be even better in year 2. Zinkernagel, even if he regresses a little bit, and this was his hot year, and he's seen some of that, I think that simply having Bamba on the other wing could keep him dangerous. I'm not expecting a fall off, is what I'm saying, from the Chicago Fire. And I don't think that anything from this series has really made me question that. It's just, where do you evolve them? And I think it's pretty clear. You zeroed in on Kwame, but the reason Kwame is on the field is because they never figured out what their engine room should look like. They never figured out who should be starting there. So I would imagine you bring in Waterman in the middle of the season, you bring in Elliott, at the offseason, okay, there's your defense, you've got some more things going. Maybe you get some fullback help on the left and the right, but I think the midfield is going to be really where you see Chicago evolve, most likely, this coming offseason.
And they're already adding a center mid from Sweden to the middle of that team. So they, I think, would probably agree with you on a lot of that, Jeff. Mm-hmm. I think we're totally aligned on the Fire. This was a terrible ending to their year. This was a good year for Chicago. Back in the postseason, and not just as Real Salt Lake sneaking in the 9th seed. I recognize Chicago were a wild card team in the East, but they were a good team. Like, this team would have been an automatic playoff team in the West. This team was so much better than last year. I talked about it. They were more improved than 28 other MLS teams, I suppose. That's impressive. This team is very much, it seems to me, heading in the right direction, and there were questions about that when Greg Berhalter was brought in and handed that dual role. But he quickly built out a staff, both in the front office and with the coaching staff, added personnel in both of those areas, overhauled the roster where I think only 5 teams returned fewer minutes than Chicago in 2025, and built a pretty darn good roster and did a lot of interesting, fun stuff on the field. Eventually did address some of the defensive problems outside of this game, but we did see some improvement on that in the last maybe fifth or so of the season. I think Chicago, between all of the on-field stuff, Berhalter operating in a way that I think makes a lot of sense by and large, the new training center that they have that's very attractive, the new stadium that they're talking about building that came out earlier this year, all of these things are inching Chicago closer to we're back territory in MLS. And I think this year might have been their announcement of that. And I think if I'm asking the same question that I've thought about for the other eliminated teams about how this season will be remembered for Chicago, it's going to be remembered as their reawakening. I think as a legitimate team that is one that neutrals want to watch and that big-time players want to go to. That's not just like bringing in those big-time players to do desperate, please save us, we have no other ideas sort of stuff, but to bring those players within a larger system that works. I'm stoked right now if I'm a Fire fan. Not stoked about how this game ended, how things played out in this series, but I feel really good. Far, far better than I felt in probably more than a decade and maybe even longer than that. So shout out to Chicago in all of this at the moment. Shout out to the Union also, who had actually advanced from this series. Jeff wants to say something else. Jeff, please say something.
Yeah, I think it's also worth flagging, Greg Berhalter year one, undoubted success. And I think that if you're a Fire fan, you should feel really bullish because keep in mind where the Galaxy were. I think that the last club to try to undergo one of these, in one successful manager we trust, and we're going to give them full range on the infrastructure, it was probably Greg Vanney when he got to the Galaxy. And it took Vanney a couple of years to sort of turn over. And granted,
it took Will Kuntz. It took Will
Kuntz, exactly, because I think he was still working out from some really difficult roster decisions that are made for him or made before him that still had to get resolved in terms of contracts. But they weren't making the playoffs in their first year. Chicago's ahead of schedule on that front. Vanney wins MLS Cup in what is his third, fourth year. I'm not saying it's that easy, and it's now year 2 or year 3. Greg Berhalter is bringing the Anschutz over, but I think that they're definitely in a good way. And you already alluded to Anton Saletros, the Sweden international, 19 caps, 29-year-old.
Yes, I knew his name. I totally knew his name. Yes, that guy. That's actually who I was alluding to. Plays
for AIK over in Sweden. AIK, if you wanted to anglize that one. But really good, solid profile, active Sweden international. If they can get Gustav Svensson 2.0, I was just thinking very happy. I think they'll be very
That makes me so happy. That makes me so happy, Jeff, that you were also thinking about Gustav Svensson. Wow. All right. Well, that moment of synergy means that we're done because we peaked right there. We can't get any better. Jeff, we made it through all these games. It's a marathon. I've enjoyed this very much, getting to break all this stuff down with you. It is a highlight of my week, each and every week.
Back at you, buddy.
Thank you again. And before we close, plug whatever you have written latest on your Substack, please and thank you.
What do I write anymore? Five Asides is still rolling. We had another piece. I tried a new format. I don't know if I'll ever do it again. I think an editor would have told me not to put 5 unrelated topics and 4,000 words in one post.
Nah.
But I did it. And I'm brave, and I did it anyway. So in MLS, you can read about the New York Red Bulls. In the rest of the world, you can read about what I have and haven't learned about Emma Hayes, his women's national team in 2025, men's national team media tour, and Gio Reyna not knowing when to stop bringing up Qatar to help his own future, basically, with the program. My very underwhelming impressions from Football Manager as well. And then NWSL talking about that New York Post op-ed and standing up for trans folks. So, we'll see what this week's looks like. I would imagine it will respond to Tom Bogert's report that North Carolina FC has decided to close up shop for a couple of years and maybe an NWSL playoff preview. Stay tuned.
Boom. Nobody covers more ground than Jeff Rueter. Jeff, thank you again for joining me today. And listeners, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate you. This show could not exist without you. You are the best, even better than Jeff, which is a high bar. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Jeff. Thank you, listeners, for listening. And we'll be back again later this week.